Welcome back to Profound Podcast, episode 26. Today we're going to be covering the problem with modern identity. And I'm just going to start off with a simple question, just to ask my friends. Gosh. Why don't you guys take a second to introduce yourself?
Okay. I'm Toby. I go here. I'm a first year at OSU, studying moving image production, and co-founder with Hobby of Demise, and this is what we do, and I think we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute.
For sure. And you, sir?
Yeah, I'm Hobby, second year, MIP student as well, co-founder of Demise with Toby.
Great. Perfect. All right. So the first question is very broad. What is identity by definition? How would you define identity as a subject or word? Identification. What do you think? Like, when someone asks you who you are, how would you answer that question? Like, who are you?
In terms of, like, identity, I think, like, a lot of the times I think of my identity in terms of kind of different types of duality, like in my parents and their background, and kind of the like privilege I've been given to be at a place like OSU and kind of pursue my education. I think it shaped a lot of it, but for the most part, I define myself as like a creative. I'm passionate about creating and collaborating with people, and that's kind of what I've continued to do since I found it. So like it started with music, now it's moved to video and like these kind of interviews. But yeah, I guess I define myself in a succinct way as like a creative with a mixed background. Yeah.
What about you?
I think identity is, culture is a big part of it. That doesn't necessarily mean like ethnic culture, but just, traditions, things like that. Your decisions, like the way you see life, that also makes who you are, how your identity is. I think, your identity might not always have to be unique, but sometimes we view the world differently, and I think that makes up a big part of your identity. And I think identity doesn't have to be the way people perceive you, it's how you perceive yourself. So, maybe some people have a stronger identity, like, they can identify themselves a little bit better because they have a little bit more, they more self-confidence, more, they look within. So I think, identity can change from time to time as well. I think, Toby, I don't know if you've always seen yourself as creative, but I never saw myself as a creative until recently. So if you would have asked me, part of my identity was, I would have not said creative, maybe 3 years ago. So it can change. So,
I agree. Especially with the point of your identity being like what you think of yourself, more than like what you are. Because I feel like the whole premise of identity and it being yours like sets up a dichotomy between like your identity and yourself. Like you're possessive over your own identity. That means like it has to be like what you think of it more than what it is. And in terms of like what we think of our identity, I think it's a lot of it is like structured upon like things outside of our control. So my next question is like, what do you think supports your identity as a person?
Like how it's supported in kind of like everyday life.
Yeah, like what keeps you being you?
Oh, it's interesting. I think I like Javi's point about kind of like viewpoint has a big thing to do with it in your perspective. But I think every day it's honestly changed a bit since coming to OSU. It being such a large institution with mostly like students in STEM or more like science or in STEM. Sometimes makes me like question if what I'm doing is quote unquote enough, right? Like if that's validated,
Acceptable.
yeah. So that's kind of like an internal conversation I have with myself sometimes, but I always land back at the point that like this is where I'm happy, is doing things like this. So I think that definitely supports my identity. My family does, visiting family, talking to them, kind of ties me back to those like childhood memories that are like really at the core of who I am and who I'm like becoming. So yeah, I'd say those are the biggest things.
In changing since you got here, in terms of like your kind of like struggle with defining yourself with like your passions because of like how society is currently like functioning, because even me myself, like I'm doing a double major right now only because I just want to be sure I have like the comfortable
Like
avenue,
security.
the security of like being like a business major, because I know there's always going to be opportunity there.
Yeah.
And then the other with philosophy, to pursue something like this, it's just, I don't know, it's just like a societal stigma that I'm still impacted by, and I'm not necessarily comfortable enough to like disregard that part of society, especially if I'm like, because this like specific niche here is not like something that you profit off of unless it gets to like a certain point.
Right.
And I can appreciate what you guys do, because like videography and like music and everything that has to do with producing can be done like anytime.
Right.
You can like find a job like that or just do like day to day. And I feel like that's going to be profitable no matter what avenue you go towards.
Right.
What do you think supports your identity, Have?
No, I think I'll be a little bit more basic, I guess. It's just day-to-day decision making makes up my identity. I think that shows through. It's, it can be simple things as, maybe you hang out with a bunch of friends and you don't hang out with a bunch of, like you say, like you hang out with a big group or a small group. Like me and Toby, we do videos, some people do music, So it's just the way you kind of look at life and kind of, make those decisions. Going to your point with, like, I guess, like, you're double majoring in philosophy and business, I think that's really interesting. I think a lot of people, especially in the very abstract, I guess, majors or, interest, you always kind of have to have a backup, kind of, So, like, if you're doing video or you're going to go into art, okay, well, you have to do a marketing or business or something that will, if your first plan doesn't work, then your backup should ultimately work, right? You'll profit off of that. But I think it's also important to acknowledge that, yes, maybe you aren't going to there's not a lot of chances maybe in philosophy or in the arts or anything abstract, but I think that's a huge part of it, right? You got to take a risk in that, and sometimes you got to, for you to actually make it and believe in yourself, you got to take that risk and, commit all to it. But, I understand, I'm scared as well because I'm majoring in film, if that's going to work or not. But I think having a backup plan is fine, but sometimes you kind of just have to take that leap of faith and just be like, you know what, I'm committing to this and I'm going to dedicate my life to this passion of mine, which is, at least for me, it's film. And see where that takes me. And maybe you don't end up with the job that, like, maybe I don't end up with a job that relates to film, but I will carry some sort of that, like, through my life, if it's going to movies or talking about movies or creating something. But I think, I don't know, I think that part of my identity will stay with me, even if I don't make it a career,
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
So wait, do you think, like, how far do you want to take film? Like, what's your ideal, like end goal?
End goal. I mean, I've talked about Toby with this. I mean, Demise would be pretty cool because, we work with film and, video editing. And so if that goes and that becomes very successful, that would be amazing. Film editor would be great too. If it's just owning like an art house theater and, like, being able to, because the reason I'm into film and, like, I'm really into it, it's the way a film can either impact you or a culture or a society. It can be a whole movement, like in like cinema history, or it could be just like, you watched this movie when you were 5 years old with your dad, and it's probably the worst movie you would ever see, but it's your favorite movie because it's a cherished memory of yours.
Yeah.
So I think that's film is such a very innocent art form, or it can be very innocent. So if I'm able to work in the realm of film, if it's making the movies or if it's sharing that out to the world, I think that's my end goal. So that would be either film editing, making the movie and then sharing it out, or having like a theater, or having like some way to discuss about it and go out into the world. Like I could maybe write books about film, I don't know, analyze the films, film critic, but I'm all over the place, so I don't know. But film editing would be cool though. A film editor,
Mm-hmm.
that'd be the best. Yeah.
You want to speak to it?
Yeah. So just to add on a little bit, and Avi, I liked your point about like having those memories from like old movies that maybe weren't the best, but they really impacted you.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of day-to-day decisions and kind of influences, I think film plays a really big role in that for people. And I've watched movies before that have opened my eyes in different ways, that have kind of opened perspectives for me to think about places I can go, or things I can do, or different people that I can be around. And for us, I think that is kind of starting to like happen more and more, especially for Demise. And I think it would be really cool to take Demise to the next level. We've spoken before about kind of taking it to the next step after we graduate, maybe buying into another production company's infrastructure and starting that way, and kind of continuing to do the same work that we do, expanding on mentorship programs and interviews and production quality and that sort of thing. So for me, that's kind of the dream for this, is taking Demise to a professional level where we can travel more and we can highlight as many people as we can who are taking initiative on things that are impacting their communities in positive ways. And for me, I came into film more recently. My background was in sound and in music, and that was kind of my avenue into it. And now I've gotten more and more into it and kind of telling the stories through this perspective. But for me, like with Javi, as film editor is his dream, and I'm always someone who has really enjoyed creating structures for creative things to happen. So the more like, I really like organizing things and getting people together in collaborative work. So yeah, that's kind of those next steps that I wanted to add.
For those who aren't aware of what Demise is, would you mind just giving a brief synopsis of what exactly you guys do?
Sure.
Gotcha.
And
Yeah.
let me know if you want to add anything.
Yeah.
So Demise is kind of an aspiring production company, production collective. We make videos, kind of documentary style interview videos on young creatives, activists, artists in the Columbus community who are doing things that impact their communities, their families, their friends in positive ways. And that's kind of the goal, is to highlight as many people as we can through this lens, and create a spotlight and eventually a network for those kind of people to collaborate and uplift each other. And, kind of vice versa for us, right? The bigger our network becomes, the bigger our influence becomes. So, kind of the more light we can cast on people, the more and more we do. Yeah.
For sure.
Javi, I don't know if you want to add.
No, I think Toby summed it up pretty well. I think a lot of people sometimes ask us why videos. I think early on we kind of decided that we would take two of our strongest elements, if it was me doing video and Toby doing sound, and hopefully we would get more people to kind of help us with that, with video shooting and things like that. and we acknowledge that like video, especially now, it's such a big medium, a popular medium, and so it's very, you know, that's the best way I think at the moment to tell stories. And so I think, you know, video was the best form, and you know, we're using video to try to, you know, promote other creatives like us, or like, you know, that are impacting the communities. Right now it's Columbus, like Toby said. We hope to expand that, maybe go further out, and just, you know, highlight, you know, people in the world, right, that are impacting their local communities and, you know, connecting the world.
Wonderful. All right. Let's move back into the subject area. All right. Do you think who we are is based off of our environment, or is it something deeper than just our circumstance?
I can speak to that. I think it has it carries a lot of weight, your environment. But the example that I always like to kind of bring up, try not to get too like deep in this, but like I always feel proud that my father, actually both my parents, came from abuse histories, and didn't carry any of that on. They also both came from extreme poverty, and you know, I've only experienced like abundance in my life, so that's something I'm kind of, I don't know, like proud to have parents that change the story. So for me, that's kind of how I look at it and how I experience it, because things can be bad, things can seem impossible, right? You can have a history of something, and right, this all depends, right? But if I ever feel like something is like I can't keep going, or I can't do this, or it feels like too much, I kind of bring myself back by being like, well, anything can change, right? And most of the times it's through mindset. Sometimes you need external support, but the environment you are in just inevitably does not need to define you. But I think that you can choose to focus on parts of your environment that can lift you into spaces that you want to be in. That makes sense.
Absolutely. So do you think that like your parents and like that type of generational aspect has a huge impact on identity? Do you feel like how your parents, I don't know, teach you how to? Do you think your parents have like I don't know how to ask this question. How large of a role do you think your parents have in like creating your identity?
Oh, a huge one.
Huge?
Yeah. I
mean,
have another thing. I mean, the other thing on identity that's kind of big for me, as someone that's like mixed, my father's Costa Rican and my mom's from the United States, that's always been something that I've kind of had to like learn how to define. And sometimes I like to compare it to like religion. You know, a lot of kids are born into a religion, and they kind of, that's what they know, and that's what they carry, right? That's kind of what's been given to them. And same with people who don't have like mixed backgrounds in terms of like ethnicity. So for me, there's this kind of definition that I have to make for myself all the time. Is like, you know, am I, you know, quote unquote, white enough when I'm around white people? Am I Latino enough when I'm around Latino people? And there's this kind of back and forth of like not feeling fully anything. And that was a big thing for me because my parents got divorced when I was like 6. So my identity kind of took a lot from that. But it also taught me a lot about kind of just communication and like how to deal with things like that. But my parents definitely had a big role in my identity in terms of like learning how to work hard, you know, how to treat people, how to you know, approach different situations, that really like carried forward. And now I like am continuing to practice that and like, you know, kind of listening to myself about how I want to grow out of what my parents have given me. So I think, you know, everybody's given something, and what they choose to do with it is kind of ultimately what creates their identity, but it has a big role what your parents do for you. Yeah.
Gotcha. You want to speak to how circumstances?
Yeah. I kind of agree with Toby, but I'll word it differently a little bit. I think your environments and your parents influence your identity. Maybe they don't define your identity, but they influence it. And I'll say that because, if like Toby was saying, if his parents came from an abusive, maybe household or background, that influenced the way they raised you, Toby. If obviously maybe they didn't want to bring that abusive to you, so they decided to do things differently.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe other kids aren't as lucky, where parents just carry that abusive nature and along. So with anything, I think that it influences your identity. My parents also came from they come from Mexico. They're from Mexico. Come from a poverty background as well. And they kind of have that American / immigrant dream coming here, wanting the best for your kid, and that dream kind of influenced their decision making, and the way they raised me. And they didn't have a lot growing up, so they tried to give me all the best that they could, as much as they could. So I obviously didn't have everything, but I had a great childhood. I don't think I ever I had everything I wanted, I guess you could say. So to me, I wouldn't say I'm rich, but I'm very privileged in the way that I was raised. And everything kind of influenced each other. It's like a butterfly effect where they came here, they stayed in Columbus, and the people they met influenced me to go to the same high school that Toby and I met, and we played the same soccer teams. And so everything kind of the parent and the environment influenced my identity and who I am now. I think that defines me. If I wouldn't have gone to the same high school, to the same soccer team that me and Toby would have never met, maybe we wouldn't even have this conversation. So I kind of look at it in that aspect, maybe not in the same, maybe more deeper than it should be. But I think environment and your parents raising you do have a big influence on your identity and who you see yourself as.
I guess I can speak to it as well, because I completely agree. Your environment has a lot to do with your initial basis of who you are.
Yeah.
I talk about it a lot in a lot of my videos, how our first prescribed identity is not something we give ourselves, but rather just a product of the environment at which we grow up. And I feel like it's so important how you're parented in maybe I'd say 0 to 8.
Mm-hmm.
I say those are the years where you're not conscious. I say nobody's conscious at 7 years old.
Yeah.
So I think at that point you're really just absorbing everything around you, and it kind of makes your reality. It makes how you're going to exist in this world, and you have to be pretty mindful once you get to an older age, because I feel most people don't realize what a great impact their childhood and growing up had on them until it's too late to feel they're able to change it. And I feel that's why most people have crises, and they feel they're stuck within this identity, and they're not taught it's something that's adaptable almost. And I feel from what I've heard, we've all been fortunate enough to have enough of a good foundation to kind of establish ourselves as people we know we're able to improve upon,
Mm-hmm.
or to grow, because I feel a lot of people are stuck in a mindset where they can't grow, or where their change is such a negative thing to who they are.
I'll add on to that. I think, to me, the foundation, you could maybe add on to that as well. The foundation could be morals, values / beliefs. I think, and maybe that's a reason why a lot of people are afraid of change, or I know a lot of people. I mean, I think it's normal. I think middle school is usually the time when we start identifying ourselves, right?
Definitely.
And I think but we still have that mentality of if your friend likes whatever music, you're gonna like that music, right? And then as you get older, you start saying you start choosing your own things that you like, and things, et cetera, et cetera. But I think your values and beliefs are a little bit of a kind of, they guide you to what you like, right? If you're usually I was raised as a Catholic, and so I wouldn't say rap was very, or hip hop or any I guess explicit music was very taboo, but it obviously wasn't
Mm-hmm.
I knew it was wrong, And so I knew like listening to middle school was kind of like, oof, like, very angsty, right? But then, as I grew older, I just kept on liking that music, and my parents don't mind it. They listen to it as well with me sometimes, or I guess they're forced to now. They don't have a choice. But I think your beliefs, your morals, the way, that foundation that your parents gave you, right? That's how you start finding yourself, identifying yourself. And if you don't have that, then it's very easy to go with whatever you see, right? If maybe if you get stuck with a bad group of friends and you make bad decisions, that's you stick with them until you meet someone else, and it's just like you don't have anything concrete for you to stick with, right? And I think that kind of influences it.
Yeah, I feel like when we don't have like a foundation for our own self-worth, we end up like being subject to other people's perspective of us.
Yeah.
And in saying that, like that's like a hard loop to get out of.
Yeah.
Because I don't think a lot of people have like even myself, it's hard to like redefine who you are, especially like in a fast way. Because I think a lot of us expect growth and change to be sort of like these fast things, when in reality they take like a lot of conscious effort, and it's not always a comfortable thing. Like I mentioned in the interview, like growth isn't always a comfortable thing. Even though we strive for comfortable growth, it's not always gonna be that way.
I think that's why growth can feel scary. Growth can feel very, I guess, achieving if you accomplish it, because it takes time and you don't notice it. I think it's very hard to notice your own growth if it's physically, mentally, but the people around you will obviously notice negative growth or positive growth. But I think growth is very challenging. I agree with that, but I think it's also it can be very satisfying once you kind of hit that like goal or something.
Right. Growth, change,
Growth.
But I always say like a quote, like one of my first initial quotes, like maybe like a year or two ago, was change is inevitable when growth is a goal. Because we stigmatize changing ourselves so much, because I think society wants us to put us in such like a rigid structure, and those people around us who like can notice the growth, sometimes even if it's positive, they'll say something that's like, oh, you've changed, like, but
Yeah,
okay,
just a quick point. I know, like, especially in middle school, when kind of everyone was just like bouncing off each other in terms of who they wanted to be, there was a lot of like stuff about if you had grown, like after the summer, if you grew up in a different way than someone and you came back, they'd be like, oh, like you changed. And people weren't always like happy about that.
Yeah.
They were kind of, I think it was uncomfortable for people to see other people in their own growth because they weren't experiencing that like yet, or at least not in the way that they like wanted to intrinsically.
Yeah.
So,
I guess I'll speak to my experience on like middle school, because I think
Gotcha.
that's such a, I feel like middle school time is such a fun way to reminisce those times. 'Cause,
Definitely.
like I kind of,
Well,
we kind of talked when we were in middle school, but not really.
Yeah.
And I think like if your middle school self saw yourself like you now.
Yeah. I don't want to think about it.
Exactly, right. But I remember like every summer would be I would always have a fun summer, but coming back I would always get excited, only because I don't know, I can't say I changed or not, only people are else I can say that, but I think it was fun to come back to school because I wanted to see how people change. Like I was that person to be like, oh, I want to see like if they stay the same. Or I remember Luca, our friend, we left the summer with long hair, and then he cut it, and it was like completely different. He was like a different person.
Yeah.
I think, but at the same time, like coming back, at least for me, some people who I probably wouldn't have never talked to the year prior, this new school year around, something changed mentally, whatever it is, right? Then we would start talking, and then I would, think there would be a cool person, and that would be my friend or another group of friends for the following year, right? And then it would be like that changed up maybe up until high school, and that's how I got to know a lot of people as well, because that like maybe middle school and teenage change in years, you kind of start meeting different people, and during that growth you get to meet a lot of people, right?
Yeah, middle school is definitely an interesting time, to say the least.
It's a mess.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think I was fortunate enough to get like at least some set in stone friends
Yeah.
that I knew wouldn't like flake on me if a little part of my identity changed.
Yeah.
But there's still like my roommate,
Mhm.
like one of my best friends. I
Drew.
wasn't really fond of him when we first met. Like we weren't.
Yeah.
We were like in the associates because we were in like same program, same
Mhm.
blah blah blah. But like we only like interacted during track, and he was a tryhard. And he'd be like that kid that was just like sprinting everything and be like, "Come on, let's work." And I'd be tired because I'm like, I don't feel like doing this. I'm in middle school, like, but I feel like accepting that people change is like one of the first foundations to like having a genuine friendship or like establishing any real bond.
Yeah.
Because I feel like oftentimes we expect perfection from people or expect them to act in accordance to our own perspective, rather than, you know, be ambiguous, like letting themselves
Yeah.
change just as much as you change.
Right.
You want to speak to it at all? Or move on to the next question?
Let's move on.
Gotcha. Okay. Is change something you should try to do?
I wouldn't say try. I don't think anyone is really. I don't know. I think. I personally don't like aim to change. I think the best type of change usually happens if it happens naturally.
Yeah.
Right. I think. When I think of change, I usually think of how I view the world. Different, gain a different perspective, or and that would influence, maybe different things I do in life. Then, the biggest change have come, funny enough, when watching movies. Sometimes I think some movies have changed me, and especially the way I think of life and maybe how I should live my life a little bit more. And those are kind of like those existential kind of movies and philosophy type of movies, which maybe I should recommend you, because you'll probably love them. And I think from there, I'm like, that changes my perspective, and maybe without knowing, subconsciously I start doing those things, right? But I'm not like maybe planning out my change or kind of saying, okay, I'm gonna change I hope to change by 2023. Become a better person. Maybe I'll do it, but I think it only happens if you subconsciously start doing it, right? Because if you try to force yourself, if you're a bad person, you try to force yourself to become a good person. I don't think.
Yeah. I think part of that is because I think what we're conscious of is like eventually imprinted on the subconscious.
Yeah.
And I think if we've made it even like the slightest point in our subconscious, or like at one point we're like, okay, this, and we've internalized that part of ourselves that we want to change, it doesn't need to be like a conscious effort anymore, because it's already like imprinted.
Yeah.
And you'll grow that way.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like with people who are, or who view themselves as negative, and they are negative people, they tend to kind of trap themselves in they trap themselves in a box and think that everything they do is exemplary of what they think they are, rather than what they could be. I think it's like everyone's a prisoner, but not everyone has like bars.
Yeah.
And sometimes we're in our own head and we're trapped, but problems of the mind are usually just in the mind, and we have to ground ourselves in like a certain reality where we think that because our thoughts aren't ourselves, they're our thoughts. They're the things we're observing, and I feel like the association and identification with like your issues and your way of thinking is only going to like compound upon it. It becomes like cyclic in that sense, because you're constantly like, it's like you're constantly paying attention to something you don't want to look at. Yeah.
Yeah. What was the kind of like base question again?
Oh, man,
just to get back.
I don't even know. It's change something you should try to do.
Right. I definitely agree that like, I think the best, or let's say like the most impactful or genuine change really comes from when you don't notice
expect
it or
maybe,
expect it, really. And that can come in like many different ways for people, but I feel like for me, coming to college was like a big change to me, but I don't wake up every day and notice how I'm like becoming more independent and yada yada yada. Like it just happens, right? But if I look at myself 4 years from now at where I'm at now, there's going to be some obvious change that like wasn't necessarily like conscious. that being said, I think there's a lot of change, kind of like the things that you focus on that does require conscious effort, like every day. Like, I don't know, like some people do like meditation, or like if they want to focus less on something in their life, they really work hard to do that. So I don't want to discount that, because I think that's definitely helps a lot of people. And for me, the biggest way I've noticed that kind of stuff happen is like who you choose to be around. And like you're saying, it's like eventually who you think of yourself consciously will like imprint on your identity. So like who you're choosing to be around. I surround myself with a lot of like really positive, creative, respectful for the most part people. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that reflects in who I am and who I choose to like be around. So I could also hang out with people who are the opposite of that, and then I would be more involved in things that are surrounded around that, and more involved in interacting with people in different ways. So, just I guess going back to the environment question earlier, it's like it's a big part.
Definitely. But I like what you said about some of the stuff being conscious effort, because like regardless, I feel like that kind of change is like, I don't know, like I meditate every day, but that's just because like it's like a kind of like a ploy for control of your own self, because of course like what you're conscious towards ends up becoming your subconscious, so it's somewhat like affirmation of the identity you wish to create. It's like imprinting it yourself rather than having your like circumstances or like having an event shape who you are. That's not to say that like your environment doesn't. It's just to say that like sometimes you need to take your own steps in order to,
right,
be better each day. Just like how you exercise and like working out. It's not like you'll exercise one time or like you'll be like, oh yeah, I want to get bigger, and then not go to the gym. Like you have to go and kind of work on that stuff. And I feel like your mind works in the same way. It's like a tool that you have to, hone your skills with. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'll move on to the next question. What determines how or what you should change?
I'll answer this one. Question. I think people around me usually. That's not to say that like someone tells me, oh, you're a bad person, change, like kind of like that. Mm-hmm. But it's more like a necessity, and I think that's what I'm kind of to add on to Toby's point, where like you're at college, you're getting a little bit more independent. Sometimes change comes from a necessity. It's like you need to change to either move forward in life, or like to change within your environment, or succeed within with wherever you are. So I think I'll speak to maybe it's, or like I'm not a good time management person, so I needed to change with a new position I got at work, to manage both school and work and projects within both. So I never saw myself using a calendar. I remember in high school and middle school, and even in the first year in college, I never used a calendar, never put anything in my Google Calendar, because I always remembered, right? But now I'm always like putting every little detail in my calendar because of that necessity to change my habits. Because if I wouldn't have done that, I would have I would have failed every class last semester. But I think those kind of like, even if it's a small change, they all come from either people or what you're doing in life. Maybe Toby, you're changing a habit, you're getting more into video. You used to be more in sound, and maybe the way you kind of look at things has changed,
sure.
Perspective. So I think those kind of can influence the change.
Definitely.
Yeah. Just to add to that, I think most times we change for necessity, if it's not conscious.
Yeah.
And like Javi was saying, like sometimes I'm like, oh well, I want to do, like we want to start this Demise thing. We want to do videos. Okay, so let me change my perspective a little bit to start seeing things like that, and to start looking at, I don't know, like an open field, and not just seeing an open field, but maybe seeing a shot that I want. And I think that's another interesting conversation about how things come into focus when they're more present in your life. So for me, like whatever I was doing, like with sound, whenever I travel, I always try and get like weird sounds that I can't find in Columbus to like use them for samples or just to kind of have them. And same with video now, it's like just creating a bigger catalog of like references and stuff. So I think, yes, a lot of the times we just change, not because we feel that we need to, but because our goals or what we want to accomplish requires it.
Our identities change.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
and it's kind of like you learn that by, like, if you don't change, then those things don't happen.
Yeah.
You know. So.
Okay. Do you think change is always a prerequisite to growth?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. I'll agree. Yeah.
Period.
Okay. Perfect. Perfect.
No.
No. Okay. What does positive change look like?
I think it's subjective.
Yeah.
Subjective to the
There's
person.
no
changing?
positive change.
Oh.
Like, if you look at
We
it
don't-
from, so like if you're thinking about change
Mhm.
just from the outside,
Right.
I don't know, someone might see one decision as like bad change because it means that there's like more distance between those people, or maybe someone that's going to become closer with that person sees it as a good change, right? So it's like, I don't know.
Yeah.
It really depends on your perspective.
Yeah, it
but-
depends on how you look at it, right? You
Yeah.
know, if you're judging yourself for for you changing, maybe it could become positive. But like Toby said, if people are around you, maybe that change maybe doesn't positively affect them, then it becomes negative. But if you still see it as positive, I believe that ultimately whatever you think or what you believe, is the right choice.
Yeah.
Usually, but
As long as you're, sticking to the values that you you chose originally,
exactly, yeah.
right, and that you want to continue having them.
Gotcha. And just like final question to wrap it up, what does growth look like for Demise or for you guys individually?
I can start. So I mean, I talked a little bit about this earlier, but I think for Demise, the growth and the kind of outlook is moving to a point where we have like a larger network of people to work with, and kind of expanding our like crew and the group of people that we work with, and kind of moving more into like having marketing strategies and having people that specialize in different things so we can grow more. But we've also talked about, when we have a bigger audience, creating programs that kind of promote mentorship and growth through collaboration. Maybe even doing like stuff for like youth, like for kind of giving back to I don't know, like for example, like Metro or something, or some of the places that we got to learn about ourselves and stuff. So yeah, it's kind of like moving further up, and creating more structures, not only for ourselves to highlight other creative people and to continue being creative, but for other people to learn whether or not that's something they want to do. So.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I think the way I look at it is, we know how hard it is, to maybe be seen in the arts or in the abstract world. So we want to highlight those people, especially youth people, because Toby and I, we've met really cool people our age, sometimes younger than us, that are doing amazing things in Columbus, right? And they're just kind of hidden. They're hidden gems, right? And we want to highlight those things. It's important to highlight them, right? Because they're young and they're very inspiring. They're ambitious and they want to change the world. And I think that's we have a platform. We want to create that platform to highlight them. And Toby and I have talked about it. We've gone back and forth of what we want to do. And I think giving back, right? Maybe creating that mentorship program, if it's for high schoolers, middle schoolers, or kind of telling them, hey, there is you can make, you know, a career off of this, right? Or you can do all these things. Don't limit yourself. You know, there's endless possibilities. We've been thinking about, and I'm just talking out here, right? The gallery shows or art shows, right?
Yeah.
That we've said,
Or
right?
like artist
Exhibition
consortiums
kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
That would be
flea
it.
market type thing.
Exactly, right? You can, you know, creatives all over could, you know, come and just show their work, right?
And support each other.
Exactly, and support each other, and the community can support them as well. And so I think that would be a very cool place to be and to grow to, and you know, they're giving back to the community, and we'll give back as well. So it's like a, you know,
Yeah.
mutual connection.
Perfect. Do you guys have any closing remarks?
No, and other than thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep.
Appreciate
And watch
you.
movies.
Watch more movies.
Watch more movies.